and welcome to our virtual teaching talk. Our first presenter is Stephanie Bromer, and she will be talking about cameras on, cameras off, and the different ways of us that we can connect online. Is it worth it?
All right, my name is Stephanie Bromer. I teach in social sciences, and the little discussion is cameras on, cameras off. Is a synchronous class meeting worth it if cameras are off? So got to thinking about this because of a student comment to me. And that comment was, I also wanted to thank you for posting all those announcements about the protests and different resources. I apologize for not speaking up in class. I find it intimidating to speak to a screen with just a bunch of names on it and no faces. Ha. So I started thinking about that because when the protests started and we started talking about that, people were hesitant to talk. And then she sent me that, and I thought, it's probably the fact that it's just a bunch of names. So I started reflecting. My observations were, first week of class, the vast majority of students had their videos on. By the end of the quarter, the vast majority had their videos off. So here were my thoughts. On the one hand, I'm super uncomfortable requiring video. I feel that people might be concerned about the background, their appearance on screen, privacy concerns, that they may not have a camera with a webcam, or a computer with a webcam, right? On the other hand, I feel that body language and facial expressions are so important to read as a teacher, and to shift gears or explain concepts or to develop connections with students. So I have this dilemma. And ultimately, I did find it difficult to develop relationships with students on Zoom, much more so than in class. And it's so important to have those relationships. So I put myself in the shoes of my students, and I thought, what are they doing during class? And I have two students of my own in college, so I do know that they're doing this. They're multitasking when they're in the class. They may be eating a meal, they may be surfing the web or answering emails or something like that. They may be sick and they're attending virtually and they don't want to look really bad, right? They're feeling all sick, they're in bed. They may have connectivity issues, bandwidth issues. They may be using their phone. And how awkward is it to hold your phone up for an hour in front of your face, right? They may feel self-conscious, that they look unflattering. The background may not be camera ready. There could be people walking back and forth, or you're loud, things like that. And they might have a belief that the class is actually being recorded and accessible on the open web. So that might make them feel a little bit weird also. But in order to create community, I was trying to think of how we can deal with this, address putting myself in the shoes of the students and my experiences, and also my desire as a teacher to have connections with students. So I thought, you could use a photo instead of a name. So that way you don't have a bunch of blank names, but you actually have a photo. So you could require that. I feel comfortable doing that as opposed to requiring video. You could use breakout rooms. At the very beginning of class, like my students in my face-to-face classes, they are chit-chatting before class, right? They get into class, they start talking to each other. Well, just put them in breakout rooms so they can have casual conversations. And then they're probably going to want their videos on so they can chat with each other. Not about school or anything, but just, to chat. And also, when I put them in small group discussions, I feel comfortable requiring them to use a video there because they're just in a small group of 4 or 5 students and they can use their video, whereas when they're in the big class, they may not feel comfortable with that. As well, I thought we should give them tips on Zoom on the first class, like, did you know there are virtual backgrounds, right? Here's how to access them. Did you know you can touch up your appearance? Here you can, there's this you can do as well. Discuss with them that they're going to be professionals or they are professionals, and honestly, virtual meetings, conferences, trainings are common on Zoom and things like that. So you're going to have to get used to showing your face, as well as thinking of when you're in a classroom, it's a professional environment, right? So instead of being in your bed, in your pajamas on Zoom, in your class, make sure you're dressed and ready. you know, so mimic that kind of professional environment. Emphasize that it's a no judgment space. People are not judging you or your background or anything like that. Possibly just have students state their name all the time before commenting, right? Somebody just starts talking, right? Like it's like, hey, do you have any questions? They just start talking, right? And instead say, oh, you know, please state your name first so we all know who you are, even if we don't have your video, right? And to kind of reduce that feeling of being anonymous, that anonymity, right? So my questions to you guys, with cameras on, cameras off, I feel it's a symbol of greater issues. How do we address connection in the virtual classroom? How do we address the feeling of anonymity in the virtual classroom? Like my student who wrote to me and said she was just looking at a bunch of names and not faces, you know, and so it felt really weird. And how do we get to know our students in virtual classrooms? So I kind of feel that it all devolved into those questions. Repeat the question as well. That's a good way to also have students engage more in the class too. So anyway, so I'm just gonna throw it out to you guys, you know, what do you think? Did you have any experiences with, you know, students and showing their faces and their videos in the class? And what kind of issues do you think that involves?
I'll say that I Pete here, to say my name. And I'm driving, if you guys didn't know, we're driving as a family here. We're road tripping, so I apologize if the signal drops a little bit. I asked everybody to turn on their video, and I strenuously, like I don't use the word mandatory, but I definitely make it a point that to engage with each other, to be here together in synchronous classroom environment, that you can't turn your video off when you're in a classroom and they signed up for a classroom experience. They're not getting a classroom experience, so let's do the best we can to mimic that. Now, do I get 100% video on all the time? No. And people step away to use the restroom or to fill up their water or whatever, and I get it. So I don't use the word mandatory or force them, but I do call on the ones that aren't.
Like, have you had experiences where people would say that they were uncomfortable with doing that, or do they mostly just say, okay, that's one of the requirements of the course, yes, I'm going to do that?
The pushback is the technology. If they say, oh, I don't have a camera on my computer, then what I say is like, you know, most of us have a smartphone, so it's very easy to join on a Zoom call or a Teams call with a phone. So I do hear them, and I say, I get that, and if you have a technical limitation, that's too bad. I'm sorry. Do the best you can is what I say. But also,
does anyone else have any comments about what you've done in the classroom?
Hi, this is Deborah. Talk about speaking, you know, saying your name first. I like that idea. I would say what I've done is I've taken the approach that I just reiterate how much I appreciate it and how much it's so great to see so many of your faces. Here's the plan. I'm not going to record it. I'm going to record it at, you know, 1:15 from 1:15 to 1:45. I'll let you know before I do. We're not doing recording now. I only record when my PowerPoints are up. This is not a recording session. And then I'll say in 2 minutes, I'm going to be recording just to like get the habits in place. And then I think the other thing that I do is, I pretty much mention how helpful it is. But I also feel from the participant side of things, it's nice not to have my camera up. I'm still really present. I'm very interested. And so there's the assumptions that are made from the teacher side that I don't think is always true. It's just really nice. So I think from both sides. So in the teaching side of things, I just compliment, appreciate. And from the participant side, I'm just really grateful, actually. And I think I'm assuming that who's ever over there teaching me knows that I'm here, and I am. So that's my goal.
Did you find that students changed their behaviors as the class went on regarding?
Yeah, I mean, these are pretty big classes. So the smaller ones, the 16s, I had everybody. But the 38s and the 36s, I found that as the time went on, I had more. The beginning was a little slow. Mm-hmm. So by the end, I had about half. And I felt like that was fine. For me, that was fine. So yeah, it's a good question. Yeah.
Stephanie, I did a sort of hybrid there where I was like, well, the expectation is when you're in the breakout rooms that you'll have your camera on. So I tried to set that expectation on day one, but in the whole class, it's optional. But now looking back at that, I may not have messaged. I will message that differently in the fall, because I noticed the same thing you described is more and more folks had their cameras off as the quarter went on. Not in the breakout rooms. There's two students who were running into technical issues where one of them I think was on shared Wi-Fi with somebody in an apartment building, right? And so they were just, they turned their video on, their audio quality just went terrible. And then we had somebody who was outside of North Bend, right? And the speed is just an issue there, whether they're on a phone or on a machine. So there were those folks clearly, had a pass on why they were doing, and they were also always super engaged. But when we were in whole class sessions, there was a tendency for folks to mute the video. And I felt like also, normally, like I feel like as things ramp up towards the end of the quarter, engagement kind of increases. And then this time, and part of it, they were just like, spring, right? Everybody wanted out. But it felt as video mute increased that engagement went down a little bit. So I don't know what I want to do differently, but I was leaning towards Pete's approach of maybe I might move towards not quite fully mandatory, because I share all the discomfort that you've got around that stuff, but something different.
So my son, who's been taking classes through Zoom, graduate classes, they were told not to use their video because it took up so much, bandwidth. Sorry, he's over there. So it took up so much bandwidth that they were getting a lot of stop and starts and things like that in the video. So they said, if you stop the video, it will be better for me to be able to teach. And I thought that was interesting. I don't think I found that problem.
I haven't had that problem. Yeah. And I have like 38. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I think we upped our internet here in my household. So there is that.
Yeah. So it might just be an individual household type of thing. Maybe your bandwidth isn't as a teacher is good. So you're going to say, don't do that. But
yeah, I resonate a lot with what Michael just shared about the decreasing on cameras as the quarter goes by, and also the engagement level. I think all of these kind of things that we've been thinking about are all pointing to the question of how do we personalize the online classroom space, right? How do we make students feel connected to the name on the screen and to the learning space? For me, I really appreciate that, Stephanie, you shared that tip about putting students in breakout room before class starts to kind of create this similar, physical classroom space environment. So I have one curious question about like whether you put them in one single breakout room or you have actually several random breakout room where you randomly assign them into. And another thing is a quick comment, actually, something I shared in my breakout room earlier is that as a participant myself, just being part of some workshops on campus, I've been picking up some of the tips that my coworkers, they use as a facilitator to encourage this type of connection. Like, if for me as a participant, it's also nice not having to turn my video on so I can get up randomly to get water and, not having to worry about looking professional all the time. But one thing I noticed a lot of you are doing, including Chana when I first joined the meeting, is that, she very warmly addressed me, "Hi, Jin." So that, I was having my video up, but that warm greeting just like, oh, I had to turn my camera on to be more personal with her, right? So, little tips like that definitely gives me ideas on how I can better be personal with my students. But again, I have a curious question about how you actually set up the pre-class breakout rooms, Stephanie.
Yeah, I had the same question. So can you say a little more about that, Stephanie?
Oh, yeah. As the participants came in, I would just assign, I would make, like if I had a class of 36, I would make like 6 to 8 breakout rooms, so they'd all be numbered, and then as they came in I would just assign them randomly, because I kind of felt like it's there's no way to, in class they congregate together, like the same ones talk to each other all the time because they become friends, right? But you can't tell that online. So I thought, I think it was nice for them to chat with just other people, and there's so many things going on in our world. There's definitely things to chat about, like how people are doing and what they think about this or that. And so that's how I just made the number of breakout rooms, and then as they came in I would just put them in and try to make sure that they were fairly even numbers. So, and I think that works pretty well to get them, not for me to get to know them, but at least for them to know each other. And I think that's important in class too, that I think with Zoom, I found also that lack of connection between the students that you get in the classroom. So.
Yeah, I kind of did something slightly more structured in spring quarter, where I would spend the first 5 minutes of each class having student in the breakout room, but give them a little topic to like warm up activity to do. Like I have them share about how their week went, or maybe one of the things that was hot topic during the week. So kind of a little more structured, but I also love the idea of just having them talk about anything.
Yeah, I think switching it up is probably good, because sometimes they just like to chit chat, and other times there's something that you really want them to talk about that's not related to class. I want to make sure that it didn't have to be related to class, because I didn't want to feel like on the spot, like, and then I wouldn't drop in either, because it was like their time to just chat. So.
I like the idea of also preparing students at the beginning of the class with some of the options like virtual backgrounds, and explaining how the breakout rooms work, and what your expectations as an instructor are, and giving them options for things like, if you're going to take a quick break, that maybe you use you add your photos so that when you're gone, people can still see your picture or an avatar of you, or something that expresses you that you would like to leave behind. And then when you come back, you can rejoin the video. And what options are there for students who don't have the bandwidth? Because I think the technical issue of bandwidth is a big one for even during some of our general meetings, when we have staff meetings, that we'll have people who have, for one reason or another, their connection is bad, and then they break up during the meeting, so it's easier for them if they turn their video off. So I think, letting students know that those kinds of things may happen and what they can do to mitigate those things, and so that when if something happens and there's a problem, or if students have a situation they're not really sure how to deal with it, some of those options have already been made available to them so they know how to do it. I think that can help alleviate it. And I've also noticed in staff meetings even that the longer the staff meeting continues over time, the more people don't use their video. So in some of our staff meetings, we're all looking at little photographs or initials of ourselves or people's names without pictures. And I don't know if it is that there's less participation. In some cases, I feel like once people have already engaged and are familiar with other people in the meeting or in the classroom, that they're not quite as dependent on the video for interaction, but that it does always help to be able to see people, see if they're nodding or if they're looking quizzical or that type of thing. And I think mentioning those things in the beginning, why is it useful to see others in the class, can be helpful.
Yeah, I think all those are great ideas. And I think I really think you're right. I think if you do it at the beginning of class, because I think that was what was most, it's kind of like we started class with Zoom and it's like, okay, we're all on. And people didn't really know how to use it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that would make people more comfortable, emphasizing that you're not recording, or when you are recording, when you are. And also just telling them how important it is to look at the names. But I do have to say, with a class with like 36 students, having 36 pictures up there, it's so hard. I mean, sometimes I get distracted with seeing them. and then other times I don't pay attention to them because I'm so into, you know, discussing what we have on the screen, or, you know, and so I don't know, can we ever replicate on in-class class on Zoom?
I don't think so.
Stephanie, you ask a good question. It reminds me, my husband's at University of Washington, and there was like a, you know, icebreaker, how to work better with Zoom just in his department. And one of the things they said was, rather than replicate, because so many of us really need that feedback when we're teaching, to know when to stop, when to slow down, when we've lost people, you know, and I need the faces so much, but I'm really exhausted by all the faces, to be honest with you, on Zoom. That's a side note. But what this facilitator was saying, that if you recognize Zoom for what it is, and you actually have fun with it, like let's say I preempted and say, I want everyone to have a face of a cat on week 2. And then, you know, people show up with tigers and like their own cat and their whatever. And then there was another part that the facilitator was saying, like, everybody look to your right, you know, like just sort of like things you just would never do in a classroom, but they were more funny. And it might facilitate that point that you bring up, which is so nice, that in the beginning you say, we're on Zoom, there's some great opportunities, but there might be some losses here. And then some ways that we can really mitigate it is in this way. Rather than just your name, make sure, you know, you've got something for us to look at. Make sure your name's, I always tell students, you cannot have someone else's name, and you have to have your name spelled correctly, and you must capitalize the first letter of your first name and your last name. You know, like just these like simple things. But I'm just thinking that along with those not fun details, it might be fun to have, you know, these themes. I like I said, I haven't tried it. It just reminded me about this idea of the versus the replication versus the recognize the tool for what it is, and it's just not what we have or had typically.
You know, I love that idea of the themes, because I do feel like we lost a little bit of fun with Zoom, right? In the classroom, you know, you can be, you know, have it a little bit more light or joking or something like that. But on Zoom, like you said, with looking at all those pictures and you're like, am I getting through? Are they listening? You know, it's just so, I think themes would be fun. It would make it kind of like lighter and, you know, and creative for the students. So that's a cool idea.
Many cool ideas here has been shared. Thank you, everyone. So what I have noticed is, like, I think Zoom is, I completely agree with you. Having all of these pictures, like great view or whatever you see, hard with many people to keep scrolling, even if they have their cameras on. One good news is, like I just learned, Teams, but not in Zoom. Teams will roll new features that where you will have sort of a classroom setup. There are chairs where all the people who are in the room and having their pictures or their video on, they will look like they are sitting in the classroom. So it will be just one picture for you as an instructor or whoever presenting. Then you can see all the faces from one spot, and you can kind of like get that sense of the classroom interaction when they are nodding their head, where they are smiling, when they are feel sleepy. So you kind of like have that in front of you. I think this is a feature is going to roll out in Teams very soon. I have tested myself with Teams, but not within Bellevue, and it's really makes difference because you can see all the faces in front of you if they opening their camera or have their pictures on, as you mentioned. I think this is really helpful to have cameras on, especially in the first 2 weeks, in the cases where their students are not really know each other, so they get at least familiarize themselves with how I look like, how even like I recognize that, like link the name with the face, then kind of like know each other, which was challenging in my case because all my students, they already knew each other. So I reached to the point where they attend the office hours, they don't even have a camera on. So I talk still to myself in the office hour audio. And then I start to change this, and I start to request in the office hours, please, if you can open your camera, and then I feel like I talk to you and it's more personalized rather than just I talk to myself. And students start slowly to listen and agree with me on that and change a little bit. But it was hard in the whole classroom setup, to be honest.
Yeah, I think the office hours, it's essential to have those faces. But that idea on Teams, though, is great about having actual like seating chart with their pictures. I love that. Does Zoom have that? Do you know?
No, it doesn't have that. This is a new feature for that Teams is developing, and it's called Together Mode, and it's very interesting. But I think it can be useful. I'm really interested to see how well it actually works, because I don't know how it works if somebody is not using their camera. So the images I've seen of this, everybody has their faces, so their videos are all on. And the other thing is that in an actual face-to-face classroom, you actually are not looking at everybody at the same time. So when I was teaching, I would stand in front of the class, and then I would shift my gaze from one student to another, and they could kind of follow who I was looking at. But in both Zoom and Teams, where I am physically or where I am virtually in my space is not where I am in each of your spaces. So I'm in a possibly different position in each of the spaces that you're looking at. So it's really hard to tell who the instructor is looking at and how everybody is relative to each other in space. And the only really large Zoom meeting that I was in was one of the HR meetings. And so some of you have very large classes of 30, more than 30 students. And one of the things I found with the HR meeting was, and they had something like 200 people joining. So even with 49 people at a time on screen, you still might have to scroll around. You didn't really see everybody at once. But then it became hard to know who wanted to speak. And so they eventually just came upon using the raise hand icon so that people would raise their hands, and then the moderator would call on people that had their hands raised. So in larger classes, there are other potential issues with addressing everybody in the class and making sure that everybody feels included in the class. So it's a very difficult scenario, the online learning. It has more challenges than I would have thought when we first started doing it.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say that everything that you share, those are great inclusive practices using Zoom. The virtual background, explaining to them how Zoom is going to work, maybe sending them an agenda every morning, what they can expect. I think all those are great inclusive strategies. Thank you.